Let's head down to Melbourne now and catch up with the IPA's Bella Debrera. Bella, I thought about you today because I saw the front page story on the Australian newspaper talking about another economic measure, this time to try and save our universities by bringing forward about $700 million of additional research funding. Fair enough, you might say. Unis have lost a lot of students. If you can bring forward the research funding, that's all well and good. But I thought of you because so much of the research the unis will spend this money on won't be how to grow better crops or, how to run a better society. It'll be the sort of stuff that you've picked over in your recent surveys.
Yes, Chris, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think what we need to look at here is the type of research that this $700 million is going to be going towards. And as you say, if it was something that's going to improve lives of Australians, if it was medical research, then that's all well and good and that's excellent. But my fear is that, this $700 million is going to go towards propagating the kind of identity politics-driven research that we've seen coming out of the humanities. And even recently, we've seen it in August when the Australian Research Council talked about the funds that it's been giving out to some of the people in our academic, in our humanities departments, which are just terrible. And should not be being paid for the taxpayer, like $1 million towards a project looking at eliminating sexual violence within the military, another $1 million going towards a project talking about a sonic approach to anti-colonialism in interwar India, and then $922,000 going towards a project looking at reproductive health and Laos socialism. So, I don't want, and I'm sure that the average Australian taxpayer doesn't want their money being spent on these kind of projects.
Now, especially if research funding is being brought forward as an economic stimulus, surely it's not too much to ask that some of this stuff might be actually economically useful or certainly useful in terms of keeping our society functioning. Well, you mentioned medical research. Few people would argue with that. There's all sorts of agricultural research that is useful. But your survey about some of this, sort of ludicrous identity politics research, I suppose. What sort of percentage does that make up of the research grants that are allocated?
Well, it's certainly less and less. I mean, I mentioned the national interest test. There were a lot more grants. I haven't got a percentage at my fingertips, but when you look at something like how history was funded, just the history research that was funded last year, it was out of the 200. Off the top of my head, I have got the numbers at the top of my head, but there's a large proportion of the historical subjects identity politics are being funded. But the main problem is the money is going towards people like Tim Soutphommasane, who is employed at the University of Sydney to propagate this myth that there's systemic racism in Australia. And again, should taxpayers be paying for this? And the answer is no.
Yeah, so much of the research actually works against the national interest rather than supporting it. A lot of unis have argued for a long while, and in fact there's been a general debate about our level of research funding not being up to speed compared to other Western liberal democracies. I suppose if they had the quality of the research was higher, we might have a stronger argument.
It certainly would, and it's a shame. The universities are meant to be where there's this free exchange of ideas, and they're both great and necessary institutions. But we're seeing with the case of Professor Peter Ridd, and we're seeing with this preponderance of identity politics, that the universities are simply failing in their duties, especially the humanities. And interestingly, on going back to the sort of the funding question, Universities Australia has admitted by its own estimate that on average, it's only lost less than 15% of its revenue this year. So first, they're complaining about not getting JobKeeper, and they're begging the coalition for money. But and meanwhile, they're paying their vice chancellors enormous sums.
Yeah, and a 15% reduction, most companies around the country would kill for that this particular year. Thanks so much for joining us, Bella.
Thank you so much.
Bella Debrera there with the Institute of Public Affairs.